happen around you. Things may happen to you, but the only thing that really matters is what happens in you. Things may happen around you. Things may happen to you. But what really matters is what happens in here, what happens inside us. This really is the essence of Unity's third principle, that thoughts held in mind create after our kind, that where we put our energy and our attention creates our experience. Come out from behind the piano, man. Thank you so much. Living in the moment. Yeah, that's where the peace, that's where the sense of well-being really resides, isn't it? And, the Unity teachings are so fundamental in helping us live there. Beloved Unity author Eric Butterworth said, "Things may happen around you. Things may happen to you, but the only thing that really matters is what happens in you." I hear that resonating with some people. Things may happen around you. Things may happen to you. But what really matters is what happens in here, what happens inside us. This really is the essence of Unity's third principle, that thoughts held in mind create after our kind, that where we put our energy and our attention creates our experience. And that does not necessarily mean that our life will always be grace and ease. Sometimes stuff happens. Sometimes people act in ways that are hurtful. Sometimes life is challenging and difficult and painful. But we always have this choice, a choice about our attitudes, our perceptions, our responses, a choice about what we choose to make those experiences mean, a choice about the meaning we give to the events in our lives. And because there are challenges in our life, and as human beings we get triggered, we get hurt, stuff can be painful, it becomes really important that we nurture a practice of forgiveness. Right? Forgiveness. I mean, in an ideal world, we would be so centered, so grounded, so connected, we would never have to do that. But most of us can't live there all the time. But if we nurture a practice of forgiveness, we can get back there. I have a couple of quotes about forgiveness that I'd like to share with you. My favorite is from Imelda Shanklin. Some of you may be familiar with her, but she's a less-known Unity author from the Fillmore's period. She wrote a book called Who Are You? That's really beautiful, but this comes from an article she wrote about forgiveness. And she says that forgiveness is the unionizing of the soul with God, comparable to the raindrops' reception by the sea. Forgiveness returns us to the ocean, the essence of God. And we're probably all familiar with the story in Matthew where Peter is asking Jesus about forgiveness, and he says, well, how many times should I forgive my sister or brother? 7 times? Is that enough? and Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 7 times 70. 490 times. That's a lot, and yet I have to admit that in some circumstances in my life, it's probably taken a lot more. That what I notice when I've really been deeply impacted, deeply hurt, that forgiveness happens a little bit at a time, and I need to keep going back and taking away and releasing another piece. I believe that this is what Jesus was talking about, to just live inside that practice. And Martin Luther King understood this very well. He says, forgiveness is not an occasional act. It is a constant attitude. So if we can develop a constant attitude of forgiveness, then a little thing over here kind of triggers us, and we can go to release, let go, forgive. And if we can develop that with the little things, the bigger things might be a little bit easier to tackle. But it does take practice. And I'd like to share a bit from 2 books this morning about forgiveness. The first is the Book of Forgiving, which is by Desmond Tutu and his daughter Mafu. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. And as you know, Desmond Tutu and his daughter were involved with the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa. And what they've done with this book is they share a lot of stories from South Africa, but they've developed a roadmap for forgiveness, 4 simple steps to forgiveness. Telling the story, naming the hurt, granting forgiveness, and renewing or releasing the relationship. And what I'd like to do is demonstrate the use of that path by an incredible woman by the name of Edith Eger, who wrote the book, The Choice. Edith, when she was 16 years old, was taken with her family by the Nazis from her home in Hungary and taken to Auschwitz, where her mother and father died. And she and her sister were part of the death march and somehow survived. Edith was a ballet dancer, so I have a little bit of resonance with her. But her story is just so remarkable and so inspiring. She went on to become a therapist, to have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she worked alongside Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, another Holocaust survivor that talked about we have the choice about the meaning we give things. And he was very instrumental with Edith in her healing process. But her book tells her story, and it's heart-wrenching, because she doesn't hold back in telling what occurred and how she was treated. But that's just the first part of the story. And so her book and the way she has lived her life, the work she does with her clients as a therapist, are a way in which she has told her story. And she talks in her book about how for many years she tried to suppress what had occurred. She didn't want to deal with the trauma, and it would show up unexpectedly in her life, and that it was only when she began to look into it directly that she began to heal. So she tells her story, and when we tell our story, it can be a story that we tell to another person, to a friend, to a therapist. We don't all have to write a book. And it could be a journal, but the point is we need to get that story out. That part of our healing is about owning that story and exploring that story. And when we do that, we can move into the second part of that journey of healing. And that is to name the hurt. For Edith, the hurt included deep loss. It included the loss of her career as a ballet dancer, as well as all the people in her life that she knew and loved that passed in that experience. It included the hurt, the harm of dehumanizing behavior, an experience that most of us will never have. But as she named it, then she was free to make a choice about what she was going to do with it. And I know for myself, when I've engaged this process, that naming made it possible for me to look more completely at the situation and know what it was that I needed to release. So naming the hurt. And then there's granting forgiveness. I've been through some experiences in my life that have been very painful, but I've never come close to being in a position of forgiving Hitler. But Edith, several decades after this experience, had an opportunity to go back to Germany for a panel. And she went back and she stood on a hill and she forgave Hitler. And she talks about the freedom of that experience, the liberation, the letting go, decades after she was liberated by the army. She had a deeper sense of release and letting go. But here's the thing. That was only part of the journey. She returned to Auschwitz, and she wasn't expecting this. And when she stood in that space, the memory came back of when she first arrived with her family. And she and her sister and her mother were standing in a line. And the Nazis were asking questions, and they would send some people one direction and some the other. They got to the front of the line, and Edith was asked about her relationship with the two women she was with. And she said, she named her mother. Her mother was older. They sent her mother to another line, and they told Edith and her sister, your mother's going to go have a shower. She'll be back in a few moments. And when Edith stood there, all of this came rushing back to her, and with it, the guilt, the shame. If I had made a different choice, if I had said my mother was my sister, she might have lived. Maybe just for another day. But in her young mind, she had taken responsibility for that and carried it with her all those years. And in that moment, she was able to forgive herself. And with that came an even deeper sense of freedom and liberation. As a matter of fact, she defines love as the ability to let go. And she says that forgiveness of ourselves is fundamental to the journey. And what I have experienced in a very difficult situation I went through, there was a similar kind of dynamic. I had done all this forgiveness. I had been sending this individual love. And when I got underneath it all, there was a way in which I was making myself guilty for somebody else's bad behavior. And for me, that brought forward the reconciliation that I hadn't expected. You know, the fourth step of the healing process or the forgiveness process is renewing or reconciling or releasing the relationship. Now, some relationships we aren't meant to reconcile. When someone's been really harmful to us and we're going to put ourselves in danger again, reconciliation isn't appropriate. Certainly if Hitler had been alive, reconciling with Hitler would not have worked for Edie. And for me, there's a relationship that I don't know if we're going to be able to reconcile because this individual isn't willing. But what I experienced when I got down into it and was able to forgive myself is a different level of reconciliation. And that reconciliation really was a moment that, how is it Imelda Shanklin says it? A unionizing of the soul with God, comparable to the raindrop's reception by the sea. And for Edith, as she was able to forgive herself, she talks about the gift that emerged. She says, our painful experiences aren't a liability. They're a gift. They give us perspective and meaning, an opportunity to find our unique purpose. In that awful experience, she discovered her purpose. Her purpose was about working with other people and helping them to discover the incredible beauty that lies within them, to help use her journey to help them find that same freedom, that same liberation. And she has traveled all over the world teaching. I'd like to conclude today with some readings from the end of her book. She was invited to speak to a group of an army unit returning from Afghanistan. And she realized that she was there to share the most important truth I know, that the biggest prison is in your own mind. And in your pocket, you already know the key. The willingness to take absolute responsibility for your life, the willingness to risk, the willingness to release yourself from judgment and reclaim your innocence, accepting and loving yourself for who you really are, human, imperfect, whole. She talks about her parents and everything they taught her, and something that she shared repeatedly in the talks she gave. Her mother's words to her at that time. Her mother said, "We don't know where we're going. We don't know what's going to happen, but no one can take away from you what you put in your own mind." And something happened as she stepped onto that stage. She said she almost fell over. There was this rush of memory, this rush of sensations, the smell of muddy grass, the fierce taste of M&Ms. It took me a long moment to understand what was triggering the flashback. Then I realized, flanking the room were flags and insignias, and everywhere I saw an emblem I hadn't thought about consciously for many years, but one that is as significant to me as the letters that spell my own name. The insignia on a GI who liberated me on May 4th, 1945, wore on his sleeve a red circle with a jagged blue 71 in the center. She was addressing the same infantry unit that had freed her so many years before. She was bringing her story of freedom to them. when many of these GIs were struggling with suicide and stuff like that. And she said, I used to ask, why me? Why did I survive? I have learned to ask a different question. Why not me, standing on a stage surrounded by the next generation of freedom fighters? I could see in my conscious awareness something that is often elusive, often invisible, that to run away from the past or to fight against our present pain is to imprison ourselves. Freedom is accepting what is and forgiving ourselves, in opening our hearts to discover the miracles that exist now. I laughed and I wept on the stage. I was so full of joyous adrenaline that I could barely get out the words. She ended her speech the way she always did as a former ballet dancer, with a high kick. And she says, here I am, and here you are. Here you are in the sacred present. I can't heal you or anyone, but I can celebrate your choice to dismantle the prison in your own mind, brick by brick. You can't change what happened. You can't change what you did or what was done to you, but you can choose how you live now. My precious, you can choose to be free. Namaste.
Can you feel it? Our spiritual home is wakening after a long slumber. There is so much going on in this church, it's impossible for us to mention all of the things here in this short period of time. So I'm just going to hit a couple of the high points. Join Anaya at 11 a.m. on Saturday, April 20th on the Pavilion for an Earth Day gathering and ceremonial cacao circle to set an intention to embrace Mother Earth in appreciation of her gifts of wisdom, support, and nourishment. Check the UCOH calendar for more information. Our community is blessed with a beautiful campus, and to support the well-being of everyone who is on our property, we are working on developing plans should there be some type of emergency. We affirm that this will never be necessary, but we have a responsibility to be prepared. On April 24th, the Austin Police Department will conduct a stress response and an active attack training at UCOH. We will begin with a prayer and grounding at 12:30 to unite us in a positive consciousness. The training will follow from 1 to 3. All are welcome to attend. Are you interested in finding out more about unity? The history of unity and the New Thought movement? The history of UCOH? If so, you will want to join our Path class, May 5th, May 19th, and June 2nd from 9:30 to 11. UCOH's Path class is a requirement for membership in this spiritual community, but all are invited. Childcare will be provided with advanced registration. Please see the UCOH calendar for details. You are invited to stop by Friendship Hall before or after the service to enjoy a beverage and a snack and make a new friend. You'll find a sheet in Friendship Hall or in the foyer to sign up to bring a goodie on one or more of the Sundays of the month. Thanks for sharing. The Celebration of Life service for Alex Green will be in Friendship Hall on Saturday, June 8th at 2 p.m. Please join us to honor and remember Alex, our beloved friend and brother. As I said, this is just a small part of the events taking place. If you want to find more about everything happening at the church, go onto the website and look up at the top. There's a link to the calendar, the UCOH calendar there. Everything, all events, large and small, will be listed there. Next Sunday at 8:30, grab a cup of coffee and join Sandra Vela, licensed Unity teacher, for the 8:30 contemplative Sunday service in Legacy Suite for her talk, I See with the Eyes of Christ. Then at the 11:30 service, Reverend Cynthia Vermillion-Foster will look at the inner being with all life in the sanctuary or online. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I circulate, and I am grateful.